Harold Lasswell's compact definition, who gets what, when, how, turns politics into a practical question about distribution, timing, and mechanism. At its simplest, politics is about allocation, who receives resources, benefits, or burdens, and by what procedures those allocations are decided. That emphasis moves analysis away from abstract ideals and toward the concrete question of outcomes. When Lasswell says who, he directs attention to the actors in a system, elites and counter-elites who possess organized power, intermediate groups that broker influence, and mass publics whose preferences and mobilization shape possibilities. Identifying the relevant actors focuses inquiry on who has the capacity to make choices and whose interests are represented in decisions. The phrase "gets what" highlights the objects of politics: money, rights, offices, services, land, and regulatory privileges, and it signals that political contest is often a contest over distribution. Tracking what makes visible the stakes of conflict, who benefits from a policy, who is burdened by it, and how resources are channeled through institutions. When draws attention to timing, agenda setting, windows of opportunity, sequencing of reform, and the temporal rhythms that make some outcomes possible and others unlikely. Timing affects strategy. The same demand can succeed in one moment and fail in another. Finally, how asks about mechanisms, the institutions, procedures, communication campaigns, markets, or coercive tools through which allocations are produced. Here, Lasswell's work links analysis of persuasion and propaganda to institutional design. Explanations must account for channels of influence as well as the formal rules. Read together, the 4 prompts form an operational frame. Identify the actors, map the goods at stake, situate the timing, and explain the mechanisms. That frame foregrounds power relations and decision-making processes as the core of political analysis, and it remains a practical starting point for studying any political question. Lasswell's 4-word formula, who gets what, when, how, functions as an operational checklist for political analysis. Now we unpack each element and show how scholars deploy these prompts to map relevant actors, specify the stakes at issue, identify crucial temporal windows, and trace the concrete mechanisms through which political outcomes are produced. Who? Start by naming the actors. Politics happens among people in organized groups: entrenched elites who control offices and resources, counter-elites who challenge them, intermediaries, party operatives, bureaucrats, union leaders, religious heads who translate pressure into policy, and mass publics whose votes, protests, or everyday compliance shape what is possible. Crucially, who is less about identity than capacity, who can coordinate, who can endure the costs of struggle, and who can convert resources into effective influence. Gets what? Next, identify the stakes. Political contests are contests over tangible and intangible goods, money and budgets, legal rights and property, offices and appoints public services like health and schools, regulatory privileges, and even recognition or status. Some outcomes look like public goods, roads, clinics. Others look like private rents or privileges that benefit a narrow group. Tracing who stands to gain or lose makes the conflict concrete and shows the incentives behind actors' moves. When? Timing changes everything. When points you to agenda setting, policy windows, and sequencing. Crises, elections, scandals, or sudden market shifts open moments when previously blocked demands can pass. Conversely, bad timing closes windows. Defeated coalitions, economic downturns, or elite bargains can freeze change for years. Analysts therefore ask, what precedes reform? What must be done first to build credibility? And when is a window likely to open again? Good strategy is often less about what to do than when to do it. How? Finally, explain the mechanisms, the channels through which allocations are produced. These include formal institutions and procedures, committees, courts, bureaucratic rules, persuasion and communication, campaigns, media framing, propaganda, market incentives and transactions, and coercive force, law enforcement, sanctions. Importantly, these mechanisms interact. Persuasion shapes public opinion, which alters legislative incentives. Procedures can codify bargains. Enforcement turns paper rights into real protections. Put together, these 4 prompts form a compact analytic routine. Map the actors, list the stakes, locate the timing, and trace the channels. Use it as your first pass on any case. You'll spot leverage points, likely bottlenecks, and the realistic levers for change. In the next section, we'll look at how Lasswell translated this lens into methods, content analysis, and the policy sciences, tools meant to make that checklist empirical and actionable. Harold Lasswell's lasting influence rests as much on method as on definition. He moved quickly from a compact analytic frame to concrete tools for studying political life, instruments designed to make questions about power, persuasion, and policy empirically tractable. Three linked contributions stand out. First, Lasswell was a pioneer of systematic content analysis. Faced with the flood of political messages in newspapers, radio broadcasts, and wartime propaganda, he developed techniques for breaking texts and images into coded units that could be counted, compared, and interpreted. Content analysis, in his hands, was not merely cataloging. It was a pathway to causal inference, linking shifts in messaging to changes in public attitudes, elite behavior, or policy choices. The method's virtues were clear. It introduced replicable procedures, made inductive patterns visible, and allowed scholars to move beyond impressionistic claims about persuasion. Over the long run, content analysis fed whole literatures in media studies, political communication, and propaganda research. Second, Lasswell helped establish the policy sciences, an applied, problem-oriented research agenda that deliberately bridged disciplines. Rather than confining inquiry to isolated theory, the policy sciences positioned scholarship as a tool for decision-making. Diagnose a social problem, assemble multidisciplinary evidence, evaluate alternative instruments, and recommend feasible courses of action. That approach reshaped expectations about the role of experts in public life. It encouraged collaboration among political scientists, economists, psychologists, and practitioners, and it elevated methods that could speak directly to policymakers' needs. Comparative case studies, program evaluations, and pragmatic design thinking. Third, and perhaps most consequentially, Lasswell's work linked political theory with empirical social science. He insisted that normative questions about justice, power, and legitimacy be informed by systematic evidence, and that empirical findings be interpretable in light of broader political concerns. This synthesis pushed the discipline toward operationalizing core concepts, developing measurement strategies, and combining qualitative richness with quantitative rigor. The result was a more applied, methodologically pluralist political science, one able to speak to both academic debates and public problems. Taken together, these methodological innovations made Lasswell a formative figure for mid-century social science. They established templates, coding schemes, policy-oriented research designs, and mixed-method inquiry that continue to shape how scholars study persuasion, institutions, and public problems. In the next section, we'll illustrate these tools in action, showing how Lasswellian methods illuminate both historical cases of propaganda and contemporary problems of policy distribution. Harold Lasswell's analytic frame and methodological tools are best judged by what they make visible and what they leave out. Start with application. Wartime propaganda offers a clear laboratory. Organized messaging, posters, radio, newsreels, becomes measurable through coding. Patterns in tone, frame, and frequency can be linked to shifts in morale, recruitment, or elite debate. There is a direct chain from message to public response to political action. Exactly the kind of causal tracing Lasswell made methodologically possible. A second domain is distributional politics. Permits, contracts, welfare programs, or regulatory privileges. Here the practical lesson is procedural. Map the actors who control access, enumerate the specific goods on the table, watch for the timing of coalitions and crises, and trace the institutional channels through which benefits are allocated. Combined with pilot evaluations and stakeholder analysis, this mapping shows where leverage exists and where reforms are likely to fail. Those virtues point to why Lasswell matters: clarity, operational utility, and a push toward evidence-based inquiry. Yet the approach has limits. It can flatten moral and cultural depth into transactions. It risks an elite-centered reading of politics, and content analysis, while rigorous, depends on coding decisions that shape results. The policy science orientation can privilege feasibility over justice if normative questions are sidelined. Despite these caveats, Lasswell's legacy is durable. He seeded methods that built media studies, professionalized policy analysis, and mainstreamed mixed method research. His checklist, who, what, when, how, remains a compact heuristic for turning broad political puzzles into tractable research and practical reform. The central lesson is methodological. Lasswell's checklist serves as a disciplined analytical entry point. Map actors, enumerate stakes, identify temporal windows, and trace mechanisms, while subjecting proposed interventions to empirical testing and ethical scrutiny. Applied in this spirit, it provides a framework for precise diagnosis and context-sensitive reform without reducing politics to mere technique or neglecting the demands of normative deliberation.